Gentlemen, welcome to the most gut-busting, spectacular performance you have ever seen, starring Giuseppe and Joseph Grimaldi. Enters Giuseppe Grimaldi, a seasoned performer playing the role of Old Joe, a classic clown. And what is this? He seems to be tugging on some sort of chain connected to something behind the curtain. He tugs a little harder and enters. Why, it's his very own son, Joseph Grimaldi, playing the role of clever little Joe. And what is this? He's dressed as an adorable monkey with a chain wrapped around his waist. Oh, what antics! Oh, what mirth! Oh, what could this little 4-year-old of a prodigy be entertaining us with? Old Joe, what are you doing? Old Joe has begun swinging the chain at arm's length, sending his son spiraling above his head. The audience is at the edge of their seats until, oh no, the chain has snapped, shooting little Joe's fragile body into the audience. Everyone flinches, but not for long, and the boy is unharmed. The boy is unharmed. Joseph is unharmed. But not for long. For Joseph knows that his father, Giuseppe, will beat him for messing up this performance. But none of that matters right now. All that matters to Joseph is the cheering, the laughing, and the clapping. And it's all for him. They love him. And for the rest of Joseph's life, he would do anything to feel this love again. What is a clown? Is it a creature of childhood nightmares? Is it an entertainer at a birthday party? Is it a theater major who doesn't know what to do with her degree? In the life of Joseph Grimaldi, a clown was someone who would do anything to make you laugh. Joseph Grimaldi was son of one of the most famous clowns of 18th century London, Giuseppe Grimaldi. And his father before him was a clown, and his father before him, and so on and so forth, all the way back to the ancient Grimaldis of Egypt. I don't know. But Joseph Grimaldi, he was the most talented of them all. He upstaged his father, and Giuseppe never forgave him. But despite all the beating, all the ridicule, and all the pain his father put him through, Joseph held on very tightly to his childlike spirit. And when his father passed away, he was relieved to have that abusive monster who never really let him be a child out of his life. But it also burdened him with being the main breadwinner of his family at the age of 11 years old. He had to perform in at least 2 to 3 theaters every single night just to make ends meet. And being a boy thrusted into stardom without any mentor to guide him into a good direction, over the years his performances were described as a combination of a child and a nightmare. He would hurl himself across the stage, contort his body in really odd positions, twist and spin until he was drunk or dizzy, got whacked with various items. And he consumed a disturbing amount of sausages on stage. Something was either broken, bruised, or brought back up after every performance. But hey, his catchphrase was, "I'm grim all day, but I'll make you laugh all night." So you might be asking yourself, Stephanie, so what? What did Joseph Grimaldi do that no other clown had done before him? What makes him so special? I'm glad you asked. Joseph Grimaldi invented the sad clown, the teardrop on the makeup. Joseph Grimaldi was the original slapstick comic, where he was literally slapped with a stick. And Joseph Grimaldi mastered the art of audience participation. You see, this is how it all began. I'll show you. When Joseph would appear to be doing something dangerous, he would say, "Shall I?" And the audience would respond, "Yes." Okay, so let's practice. Shall I?
Yes!
Yeah. So he would do something like threaten to throw salt in his eyes and say, "Shall I?"
Yes!
Yeah. He would hold a lobster at pinching distance and say, "Shall I?"
Yes!
Yeah. He would cock a gun and point it at his foot and say, "Shall I?"
Yes!
And then he literally and figuratively shot himself in the foot. But this act wasn't something Joseph just did on stage, but what he did all his life. A stranger came up to him after one of his shows and said that if he gave him all of his money, he would double it. Shall I? No. The theaters that he worked at every single night cut his pay in half and asked him to add one more show. Shall I?
No.
Yeah, no, Joseph, you can say no. Do you, Joseph Grimaldi, take Mary Brewstow as your lovely beloved wife, to have and to hold, for richer or for poor? But spoiler alert, probably poor, because she's going to spend all your money and force you out of retirement. When Joseph's son, J.S., was born, he wanted nothing more than to give his son the life his father never gave him. He didn't want him to join the theater. He wanted him to focus on his education so that he could become a healthy and happy man. But because of his wife's excessive spending and how expensive private school was, Joseph had no other choice but to have his son join him on the stage. Because people paid a lot of money, not just to see one Grimaldi, but two. And J.S., he was brilliant, far more talented and more of a prodigy than his father ever was at his age. J.S., the audience loved him. And Joseph thought that maybe his son could follow into his footsteps, and that maybe as father and son, they could be happy together. But how can you raise a child when you yourself are still one? When J.S. grew up, he did grow up to be a professional clown like his father. But behind the curtain, outside the spotlight, behind all the makeup, J.S. grew up to be hateful, resentful, and jealous of living in his father's shadow. Having a father that could barely take care of himself, J.S. spiraled out of control and died of alcoholism in his late 20s. It was said that upon hearing the news of his son's death, he was standing in between the two theaters he worked at every single night for the last 40 years, just in full costume, in the middle of a storm. His broken and bruised feet ached on the cobblestone path. Street lamps were distant fireflies in between the rain and tears that blurred his vision. His bright, puffy costume now hung heavy on his skin and weighed as much as his guilt. The red, white, and blue makeup bled down his face, exposing the man that suffered underneath, but made you laugh all night. But how could he have taught J.S. how to take care of himself when Joseph didn't even know how to love himself? To cope, Joseph did what he always did when facing the many tragedies that fell into his life, he performed. But because his well of inspiration was always drawn from his depression, he eventually had nothing left in him. Every performance after that, Joseph saw as a failure, but audiences still loved him. Every performance after that, Joseph invented further and better ways to destroy his body and his mind, and audiences begged for more. It was only a matter of time when Joseph was diagnosed with severe depression and early paralysis. In his last performance, all he was capable of doing was sitting in a chair. His bloated body and shrunken legs were further deformed under his fantastic dress. Glossy eyes twitched behind the white chalk face paint, and a silly cone hat sat upon his trembling head. All he did was sing. Here a sheephook lies, port unbowling, the darling of our crew. No more he'll hear the tempest howling, for death has broached him to. His form was of the manliest beauty, his heart was kind and soft. Faithful below, Tom did his duty, and now has gone aloft. To me, Joseph Grimaldi is the archetype of the self-destructive artist. The only way he knew how to deal with any of his problems was to further throw himself into his work until he could no longer create, until he was no longer the clown that everyone loved. Joseph was a brilliant man, and he didn't need to suffer for it. He could have done so much more. So remember Joseph Grimaldi, and remember that we can build generations of artists that don't destroy themselves. Remember that we can be healthy and creative. And remember that your work is not your worth. Take care of yourself so you can keep laughing.